Avoidants don't attach the way most people do. Their brain is wired around survival first, intimacy second. Every person they get close to is unconsciously scanned and placed into one of two categories, regulation or risk. Regulation means the person soothes their system without demanding vulnerability. Risk means the person awakens something deeper, something permanent, that threatens their sense of autonomy. Most people never move beyond regulation. They feel pleasant, familiar, comfortable. They don't disturb the avoidance internal balance. But you didn't just make them feel good. You activated something their nervous system recognizes as non-replaceable. And the moment that happens, the avoidant doesn't lean in. They lock down. This is what I mean by triggering the final attachment circuit. It's not romantic fantasy. It's neurobiology. The avoidant brain is hyper-attuned to loss. When it senses a bond that could fundamentally alter their internal equilibrium, it doesn't register excitement first. It registers danger. Not because you are unsafe, but because losing you would be destabilizing in a way they don't know how to survive. That's why the shift feels so confusing. One moment there's depth, presence, intensity, and then distance, coldness, silence. This isn't manipulation. It's a protective reflex. Their nervous system says this connection could change me. This connection could trap me. This connection could expose parts of me I've survived by keeping hidden. And here's the part most people miss. Avoidants don't pull away from people they don't care about. They disengage easily from those. The shutdown happens when attachment crosses a threshold, when the bond starts to feel irreversible, when the brain says, if this goes further, I won't be able to walk away unchanged. You became that threshold. That's why they don't treat you like everyone else. You don't get the casual discard. You don't get the clean ending. You get the hesitation, the circling, the unfinished sentences. You become the relationship that never fully ends in their mind, even when it ends in reality. Philosophically, this is where freedom and fear collide. The avoidant equates freedom with survival, not happiness, survival. And you represent something paradoxical, a form of connection that doesn't imprison, yet demands presence. A bond that doesn't control, yet requires honesty. Their system doesn't know how to integrate that because it challenges the core belief they've lived by that closeness equals loss of self. So their mind starts doing what avoidant minds do best, delaying, intellectualizing, rationalizing. They tell themselves they're not ready, that it's not the right time, that something feels off. But what's really off is their internal model of love. You don't fit into their old patterns, and anything that can't be patterned feels dangerous, and this is crucial. Once that circuit is activated, it doesn't deactivate. You don't become replaceable just because they pulled away. Their nervous system has already logged you as a permanent reference point. That's why future relationships feel hollow to them. That's why they compare without realizing they're comparing. That's why your absence doesn't bring relief. It brings noise, mental noise, emotional static. They may not articulate this, avoidants rarely do, but internally there's a quiet recognition this person mattered in a way others didn't. This person reached a place I can't unfeel. And that's why this isn't about chasing them or proving your worth. You don't need to convince someone who already knows. Your impact wasn't created by effort. It was created by resonance, by the way you met them without trying to fix them, by the way you didn't abandon yourself to keep them close, by the way your presence felt expansive instead of demanding. You didn't trigger attachment because you were perfect. You triggered it because you were real, and real is rare. So if there's one thing I want you to take with you, it's this. When an avoidant pulls away after deep connection, it's not because you were forgettable. It's because you were unforgettable in a way they don't yet know how to live with. Now let's talk about what really happens when they pull away, because this is where most people misinterpret the signal and assume rejection, disinterest, or emotional immaturity. What's actually happening is far more precise and far more revealing. Avoidants don't leave because they feel nothing. They leave because they feel too much without the internal capacity to regulate it. When connection intensifies, their nervous system doesn't say, "This is good, move closer." It says, "This is overwhelming, create distance." And with you, that distance isn't about escape. It's about containment. Here's the paradox. With people who don't matter deeply, leaving feels easy, clean, almost relieving. There's no internal debate, no lingering emotional residue. But with you, leaving doesn't feel safe. It feels destabilizing. So instead of disappearing completely, they oscillate. They pull back just enough to calm their system, but not far enough to sever the bond. Silence, emotional coolness, sudden busyness. These aren't messages of indifference. They are nervous system strategies. The avoidant is trying to lower internal arousal without losing the connection entirely. They don't want to lose you, but they don't know how to stay present without feeling engulfed. So they do the only thing their system has learned to do: reduce stimulation. This is why their withdrawal often follows moments of closeness, a deep conversation, emotional openness, a sense of being seen. Intimacy spikes their internal alarm, not because use intimacy is bad, but because it threatens the identity they've built around self-sufficiency. With you, the closeness feels real enough to challenge that identity. And this is important. They don't feel safe leaving you because you've become a stabilizing reference point. Even in your absence, your presence reorganized their emotional landscape. Once that happens, walking away completely feels like stepping into emotional freefall. So instead of leaving, they hover. They disappear and reappear. They detach and then check back in, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. From the outside, it looks inconsistent. From the inside, it's a survival negotiation. Philosophically, this is where fear masquerades as control. The avoidant believes distance equals safety, but with you, distance doesn't bring peace. It brings tension. Their system stays alert, hyper-aware, wondering what you're thinking, wondering if they've lost something they can't replace. That's why silence doesn't erase you from their mind. It amplifies you. This is also why they don't close the door cleanly. No definitive goodbye, no emotional finality. There's always an unfinished edge to the connection because their nervous system hasn't resolved the attachment. They may tell themselves fine, that they've moved on, but emotionally they've only paused the experience, not completed it. And here's where people often make the mistake of chasing or demanding clarity. When you do that, you unintentionally lie confirm the avoidance core fear. Closeness means pressure. But when you don't chase, when you remain grounded, regulated, and self-contained, you do something far more powerful. You become the proof that intimacy doesn't require collapse or control. Your calm becomes disarming, not because it punishes them, but because it contradicts their expectations. They're waiting for you to explode, plead, or disappear emotionally. When you don't, their nervous system is forced to confront a new reality. Maybe distance isn't the only way to feel safe. That's why your silence affects them differently than theirs affects you. When you go quiet without resentment, without dramatization, it doesn't soothe them, it destabilizes them. Not in a cruel way, but in a clarifying way. It removes the external regulation they relied on and brings them face to face with their own attachment wounds. And this is crucial. None of this means you should tolerate emotional unavailability or wait indefinitely. This isn't about endurance. It's about understanding. When you understand that their pullback isn't rejection, you stop personalizing it. And when you stop personalizing it, you stop trying to prove your worth. You were never unsafe to them. You were significant, and significance to an avoidant feels like risk. So here's what I want you to leave with. When an avoidant pulls away but never fully leaves, it's not because they don't care. It's because part of them knows leaving you completely would cost them more than they're ready to pay. Now let's talk about what happens after you, because this is where the story stops being about the relationship itself and starts being about the imprint you left behind. Avoidants don't consciously memorialize people. They don't sit around romanticizing the past or admitting emotional attachment, but their nervous system keeps records, whether they want it to or not. And once you become their emotional reference point, everything else is measured against that internal benchmark. This doesn't mean they think about you constantly in a sentimental way. It means their body remembers you, the tone of connection, the rhythm of closeness, the way intimacy felt without pressure. That becomes the baseline their system uses to evaluate every future bond. And because that baseline was set with you, nothing quite lands the same afterward. Here's why this matters. Avoidants are not searching for love the way most people are. They're searching for regulation. Someone who doesn't disrupt their equilibrium. Someone who doesn't require them to grow faster than they're ready to. And most connections fit neatly into that. They feel fine, manageable, forgettable, but you disrupted the system in a different way. You didn't destabilize them through chaos. You destabilized them through coherence, through consistency, through a kind of emotional presence that didn't demand performance or control. That's rare. And once experienced, it can't be unseen. So when they move on, something subtle but persistent happens. Conversations feel flat. Touch feels transactional. Emotional exchange feels either too shallow or too demanding. And they can't quite articulate why. They tell themselves they picky now, or emotionally unavailable, or just not ready. But what's really happening is comparison. Quiet, unconscious, unavoidable. They compare how safe they felt opening up with you versus how guarded they feel now. They compare how natural closeness was with you versus how effortful it feels elsewhere. And this comparison doesn't lead them back to you immediately. Often, it leads them into more avoidance, because recognizing that you set the standard forces them to confront a deeper truth. The problem isn't connection, it's my fear of it. Philosophically, this is the cost of encountering something real before you're ready to sustain it. Once you've touched authenticity, everything else feels like compromise. And avoidance, more than most, are sensitive to internal incongruence. They can tolerate loneliness, but they struggle with falseness. You showed them something that wasn't performative or conditional, and now their system rejects substitutes. This is why avoidants often cycle through relationships that look fine on the surface but never deepen. They're not chasing you. They're chasing the state you evoked in them. And because they don't understand that distinction, they keep missing it. They look for the feeling with realizing the feeling emerged because of who were with you. This is also why they reappear. Not always with clarity, not always with accountability. Sometimes it's a message, a like, a question disguised as coincidence. It's not nostalgia, it's regulation seeking. Their system is reaching back to the last place it felt both stimulated and safe, even if that safety was unfamiliar. But here's the part that's important for you. Being someone's emotional reference point doesn't mean you're meant to wait, fix, or rescue them. It means you played a role in their internal development, whether they integrate it or not. Your impact isn't defined by whether they return. It's defined by the standard you set. And that standard lives on regardless of distance or time. This is why your absence carries weight. When you're gone, there's a quiet recalibration that happens inside them. They feel the contrast. They notice the gap. And even if they never name you, they feel the loss of a specific quality of connection they haven't been able to replicate. You didn't just matter in the moment, you mattered structurally. You reorganized how their nervous system understands closeness. That's not something that fades. It becomes part of their internal architecture. So if you ever question whether what you shared was real, remember this. Temporary people don't become reference points. Passing connections don't leave standards behind. Only relationships that touch something essential do. And once you become that measure, you don't disappear. You echo. At this stage, something counterintuitive begins to happen. The deeper their internal recognition of you becomes, the more they resist making it official. And this is where people get confused and assume mixed signals mean mixed feelings. But with avoidance, resistance to commitment is rarely about uncertainty. It's about finality. Avoidants don't fear relationships. They fear irreversibility. Casual connection feels safe because it leaves the exits open. Commitment, on the other hand, feels like a door closing behind them. And when the person in front of them feels temporary, they can commit without much internal conflict. That's why you'll often see avoidants settle quickly with people who don't challenge them emotionally. There's nothing at stake. With you, everything is at stake. Choosing you doesn't feel like starting a relationship. It feels like choosing a trajectory, a version of themselves that can't hide behind emotional distance anymore. A life where they're seen, expected, and internally accountable. That's not romance to an avoidant nervous system, that's exposure. So instead of leaning in, they stall, they slow things down, they keep the connection ambiguous, not because they're unsure of you, but because being sure of you forces them to confront what comes next. And what comes next requires growth they haven't prepared for. This is why their commitment language sounds paradoxical. They'll say "thee." NGS like, "I've never felt this way before," followed by, "I don't know what I want right now." Those statements aren't contradictions. They're admissions from two different parts of the psyche. One part recognizes you as endgame. The other part panics at what that would demand. Philosophically, this is the clash between identity and evolution. Avoidants survive by staying ahead of dependency. Their sense of self is built on autonomy, emotional containment, and self-reliance. You represent a relationship that doesn't take those things away, but they don't know that yet. All they feel is the threat to the old self that kept them safe. And here's the crucial insight. Avoidants delay commitment longest with the people they perceive as permanent. If they don't see a future, there's no pressure. But when they do see one, the weight of that vision becomes overwhelming. Suddenly, every decision feels irreversible. Every step forward feels like it locks something behind them. So they hover in the in-between, not gone, not fully in, holding the connection open while trying to regulate the fear underneath it. This is also why logic doesn't work here. You can't convince someone into readiness. You can't argue someone out of a nervous system response. The more you push for definition, the more they associate closeness with pressure. But when you remain steady, clear about your standards, calm in your presence, you do something far more impactful. You show them that commitment doesn't equal entrapment. And that creates internal dissonance. They expect commitment to feel like loss of freedom. But with you, it feels like expansion. And that unsettles them because it contradicts the story they've lived by. It suggests that love might not cost them themselves. And that realization forces a question they've avoided their whole life. If closeness doesn't destroy me, then why have I been running from it? This is why avoidants often need time. not to decide if they want you, but to renegotiate their identity around the idea of staying. You are not the uncertainty, you are the catalyst. And whether they rise to that moment or retreat from it determines the rest of their emotional life. So remember this, when an avoidant resists committing to you, it's not because you're an option, it's because choosing you feels like choosing a future they're not yet brave enough to step into. By this point in the journey, something subtle but profound has shifted. The avoidant is no longer reacting only to the connection, they're reacting to you. Not your words, not your expectations, your state. Most people try to secure closeness by effort, by explaining, by adjusting themselves to be easier to stay with. But what disarms an avoidant nervous system isn't pursuit, it's regulation. And this is where your calm power enters the picture. When you don't chase, don't collapse, don't dramatize the distance, you interrupt a pattern the avoidant has relied on their entire life. Their S. Istem expects intensity to escalate into pressure. It expects closeness to demand reassurance. It expects distance to provoke pursuit. When none of that happens, their defenses don't know what to do with you. Your emotional self-regulation becomes a mirror. Psychologically, avoidant defenses are built to manage other people's reactions. They stay distant to avoid being overwhelmed by someone else's needs, emotions, or expectations. But when you remain centered, clear in your boundaries, steady in your presence, you remove the external stimulus they're trying to escape. And suddenly, the discomfort they feel can no longer be blamed on you. This is deeply unsettling for them because for the first time, their nervous system has to sit with its own fear rather than projecting it outward. There's no emotional chaos to point to, no demands to push against, no drama to justify withdrawal. Just the quiet realization that the threat they've been avoiding isn't you, it's intimacy itself. This is why your calm feels powerful. Not because it's silent treatment, not because it's manipulation, but because it's congruent. You're not withholding to control. You're regulating to protect your own integrity. And that distinction matters at a nervous system level. Philosophically, this is the difference between control and presence. Control tries to shape outcomes. Presence allows truth to surface. When you stay present without chasing, you allow the avoidant to experience closeness without Bersian. That's something they've rarely known. Love to them has often been paired with emotional cost. With you, it's paired with emotional steadiness, and that rewires expectations. They begin to notice that being near you doesn't spike anxiety the way they anticipated.